Hi, everyone. It's S.J. Thomason with Christian-apologist.com. And I want to say hi especially to Jesse Camping because we are going to answer some of your questions today. I am here with Dr. Josh Bowen. And Josh is from the channel called Digital Hammurabi. And I don't recall if I've pasted his link in here, but I'll put that in the description so you guys can get a hold of him. You can also find him on Twitter at DJ Hammurabi1. And so that's how you can find him. He's a very active YouTuber. He puts out a lot of material on what he's done his academic studies on. So he's studied Assyria and he has lots and lots of knowledge on the ancient Near East. And so we are very lucky today because we're going to get to hear about some of that knowledge and we're going to see some pretty cool questions being answered. And so he says, bring it on, bring on your hardest questions. He's not afraid.
I'm not afraid to say I don't know.
yeah, if he doesn't know, he's going to say he doesn't know. It's a complete.
I don't know, but probably somebody does. So
at least you don't do. I just quick tangent on my dissertation. They asked me seven questions in my comprehensive exams. I don't mean my dissertation. I mean my comprehensive exam.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I just could not, for some reason, I drew a blank. It was on virtual teams, and I couldn't remember. So I remember starting to answer it and then going off on some tangent of things I did know.
Yep.
my chair totally caught me. He said, "What is this?" I see what you're doing here.
Yeah. Okay. When I sat for my defense, I was all ready to talk about all the details of my dissertation, like we're going to talk about lamentational liturgies, Sumerian laments, and then there, of course, there are always two people or so that are outside of the department that are in on the defense. And they said, "So what is a Sumeria?" And I was like, and of course, trying to dig back down to get into all that, sort of basic groundwork stuff, I was not prepared for. So my advisor had to kind of take over for a minute. He's like, "Okay, so Josh, what's the earliest language that we have?" Sumerian. Good. It was.
That is so funny. Yeah, people from outside, that's when they throw you off a little bit when those kind of things. So that's funny. Yeah, so I know I say hi to Mind Onion. I don't know if I said hi to you either in the chat yet. So let's take a look at some of these questions that Jesse Camping had. So this first one he says, at approximately what time, date, year were the laws translated into Canaanite laws, and how are they similar or how do they differ? And so we're talking now about the Code of Hammurabi. So Dr. Bowen has a lot of information about that code. So that's what Jesse is asking.
So into Canaanite. Yeah, I remember this question, and so I'm not entirely sure what he means by into Canaanite. So if he's referring to the biblical laws, we can talk about
probably
what
that.
scholars say about it.
That would make sense.
I mean, we don't have a lot of strictly Canaanite material, like what we would consider Canaanite as opposed to biblical. There are, I think, maybe 2 documents that we have that reflect anything legal in Canaanite. So I think one of those documents is actually just a list of witnesses. I mean, there's not a lot there. But if the question is about when did the sort of the legal texts in the Hebrew Bible get translated over, that's debated. And actually it's debated quite a bit. The scholarly consensus, and probably when I say consensus, I mean almost everybody, I think, would probably say that we know that probably the covenant code in Exodus came first. So just to kind of talk about, there are 3 sort of legal sections that we see in the Torah. You have the covenant code in Exodus, 20 to 23. So that has the 10 commandments, and then the infamous Exodus 21 passage. And then there's Deuteronomy. So there's sections of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 15 is the one we always go to because of the slavery issue. And then you have the holiness code in the book of Leviticus. So the majority would say that the covenant code came first. We don't know exactly when. Actually, I was just reading Greengus today, Samuel Greengus. He's got a 2011 book, and I've got it here, which is actually an excellent resource for anybody that's looking. So this talks about what he's doing is he's looking at Ancient, and I'll promise I'll get back to this. Sorry, but just it's a good book. I think you might actually
Oh
really
yeah,
enjoy
no,
it,
it sounds
SJ.
interesting.
So he's talking about anywhere that there's overlap between ancient Near Eastern law and biblical law and rabbinic law, like rabbinic interpretation of it. So it's really good. Anyway, so covenant code Exodus probably came earliest, maybe 8th century, but it's debated. Then you have the Deuteronomistic code, which they think is most likely late 7th century. So, with Josiah's reforms, like 621 maybe. And then after that, the holiness code in Leviticus, and there's all kinds of dates for that, but later. Now there is a guy named Van Seters, and Van Seters made the argument that he actually thinks the holiness code is first. So he would flip the the holiness code and the covenant code. He thinks the covenant code comes late. But yeah, it's debated. But it's sometime sort of like they're in the middle of the first millennium they could put into writing.
Oh, that's interesting. And I do you happen to know what the JEPD theory is? St. Brucifer is saying, any thoughts on the JEPD theory?
Yeah. So when you talk about I think the last time we talked about how it's cool being an Assyriologist because we get to work with the actual original tablets. With the biblical text, New Testament again as well, you don't get that. You're working with much later manuscripts, sometimes much later, sometimes not much later, but they're not from the actual contemporaneous time contemporaneous with the autograph. So the biblical text, what the sort of the traditional view was that these were written by put down by Moses as a unit and handed down. Most scholars would say that's not the model that we should be following. In the 18th, early on, there was a guy named Wellhausen, Julius Wellhausen. He sort of he was one that was most well known for it. And he came up with this idea that there were 4 different sources, essentially like 4 different versions, not versions, but 4 different sources from which a later editor came back and sort of edited them all together. And the 4 sources were called the Yahwist, the Elohist, the Deuteronomist, and the priestly source. So instead of Y, the German is J for Yahweh. So J, E, D, and P. That went kind of off the deep end because they started saying, okay, well, this part of this verse is J, and then this part of this verse is E, and then this, these 3 words in this verse this is E, and this, but this over. It kind of got a little overboard, I think, and people kind of moved away from being able to, strictly define, here are all the places that are J, and here are all the places that are E, and whatever. So the field swung a little bit, and there are different ways that people think about how the texts were redacted together over time. I've got a video on this that I kind of give an introduction to this. It's called The Formation of the Pentateuch. But basically, general thought, now there still are people that, good people, I think Jeffrey T. Gay is a scholar that would hold to a modified form of the JDP, or the documentary hypothesis is what it's called. But basically, it's probably a combination, right? I mean, if you go to the flood story, for example, I think that's probably where you get some really strong evidence, or the Joseph story in Genesis 37. I mean, you can see, different strands, but that doesn't. I think one thing that people miss is that the final editor is putting these things together in a way that makes sense to him and to his readers. So while I think there are some ways that you can tease out more in some places than in others, where the original sources took place, or where original sources were, or where you see redaction, like layering, it's definitely there, and you can definitely find it. People have written. Actually, David Carr is coming out with a new book later this year. I can't remember when, but it's on Genesis 1 through 11 and sort of the redaction history, editorial history of that. I'm going into far too much detail. Sorry, SJ. But
Oh, no
yeah,
way.
That's sort of what that is trying to get at how did we get to this final form that we have and make sense of it.
Yeah, see, it's my understanding, and this could be off a little bit, but it's my understanding that the Pentateuch was written by Moses, but it was from an oral tradition in a lot of cases,
Yeah.
like with the Noah story and that sort of thing. And that just is because my reasoning is because Jesus said that. And so because Jesus said that, it just seems to me like the reasonable solution. But of course, if you don't necessarily believe in that, then I can see where you're taking this other thing. I'm just curious. This is going kind of into one of the things you just said a couple of minutes ago. How old do you think? Now, I have my opinions, and the audience has already heard my opinions on this. But when people talk a lot about the dating of the New Testament, and I know this isn't your field, the New Testament, but you mentioned that they were written a lot later, and so I was wondering, what do you mean when you say a lot later? You said some are written early and some are written a lot later.
Yeah, I mean, to further caveat, like you said, this isn't my field. I think that probably most scholars would say that Mark's probably the earliest that we have, maybe written around 70, a little bit earlier. With I think John being the latest, at least of the four gospels, maybe around 90, 95. So, I when I think about the Hebrew Bible, I think, relatively speaking, that's a lot later because you're thinking like if the covenant code is put down, maybe let's say in the 8th century, Qumran are the earliest copies that we have. So, you're in 2nd century now. So, that's quite a span. Obviously with the New Testament, it's much shorter time span. I think the earliest copies that we have
P20, isn't it P52 or something like that, from around 125 or 110 something?
Yeah, I think that's the earliest one that we have. It's been probably 17 years since I've looked at that papyrus. One of my professors back at seminary, he wrote a book on it and asked us to copy edit it for him, which was really funny for these students reading through looking for errors. He's asking us to look for spelling errors. That's what he's doing. But yeah, so the papyri, you have some earlier papyri, but. Yeah.
See, I go with there's just do a little teeny bit of pushback, but I would say I'd go to like Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman, in his Misquoting Jesus book, he did say that the core tenets of Christianity have been preserved in appendix in his version 2 of that book, and he said he's in an agreement with Bruce Metzger on the core tenets being preserved in the New Testament. So even if we don't have some of the original manuscripts, I think we have something that we can consider reliable as far as Christianity is concerned, as far as reporting.
I agree wholeheartedly. One of the things that I think probably both sides of the argument, maybe not here, but like out there on Twitter or whatever, tend to miss is that it's like an all or nothing sort of thing. So okay, well, you don't have any autographs, therefore you can't know anything. Well, that's sort of silly. But the other side is, well, we have something, so that means we can know everything. And I think both of those are probably, too extreme. I agree completely that particularly with something like the New Testament, what we have in manuscript and the manuscript tradition allows us to get pretty close to, what was originally in these documents. And I don't know that that's really terribly debated. In other words, how is it that was said to me, I was taking textual criticism, is that we have like 110% of what was there, right? And I don't know that that's precise in any way, but like it's less about reconstructing what isn't there and more about whittling down what it is that we have to try to say, okay, for example, Romans 5:1, the classic example that I always think about is we have two different forms there. Let us have peace with God, erkomen, or is it we have peace with God, erkomen, and the two different O sounds in Greek. And you can see erkomen and erkomen, or, you can see how they would get mixed up. But the significance of that variant in the text is pretty big because on the one, Paul's saying we have peace with God. In the other, it's let us have peace with God. So it's not an indicative form, it's a subjunctive form. So it's like it's not actualized, if that's the word I think I should use there, actualized. But yeah, so but it's not about, we don't have the material in one of these or the other. It's that we got to figure out which one it is. So I think that's important. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I know. I was just listening. Yeah, I know. I think that there are a lot of those kind of things where there's translation issues. In fact, even if you look at all of the different versions of the English translations, it's kind of funny because I feel like some of the stuff that I see in the King James, especially, I don't see in the other ones. And I know it's because I've heard that the other ones have translated directly from the Greek and the King James had not. I don't know if the King James was translated from the Latin or what it was, but you have things like the kingdom of heaven is within. That's one of them that's in one of these versions. And the other ones say in the King James version, and the other ones say something like the kingdom of heaven is in your midst. And to me, that's two different things. So it's hard for me to, I mean, those two things kind of, that is kind of a conflict in my mind between the versions. So it's
difficult. I mean, just from a translational standpoint. So that, the King James definitely was translating from the Greek.
It's from the Greek for the King James. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a long story behind it. Parts of Revelation they didn't have when they made the. I'm trying to dig back into into my memory here. Anyway, it's not that they were translating from some other language. I mean, they're going from the Greek and the Hebrew. I think the argument is that since the 17th century, we've actually found and learned a lot more from an aspect of manuscript evidence. So when a new translation comes out, I think people a lot of times think, they're just picking up the latest English translation and like trying to make it sound better. No, they're as you said, they're going back to the the Greek and the Hebrew and the Aramaic. But the thing is, we learn every year. People are writing dissertations in their doctoral programs, and people are publishing new books on different grammatical analyses and figuring out, this actual Hebrew form or this Greek form actually has this particular nuance. And so when you come to a new translation, okay, this Granville Sharp rule in the Greek has to be employed. And anyway, so yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult.
Yeah, I found a version that I usually use the NIV, the New International Version, but I found this ISV one that Rob from Sentinel Apologetics turned me on to. And I like that one. I like the ISV.
Yeah.
Pick my favorites.
I tend to like the NIV just because it's, when I was in seminary, it was all about, you got to get the word for word wooden translation. You got to know exactly what that's saying, word for word. And, that's good. There's obviously a lot of good that goes with that. But the nice thing about the NIV is they're actually trying to get the sense of the text. They're actually trying to say, okay, yeah, there's an idiom here that we can translate it woodenly. But that's not going to make any sense in English because we don't have that idiom. But we have an idiom that parallels it, so we're going to use that one instead. So, I like the NIV.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, that's what Frank Christian's asking, is Revelation, and I know, Jesse, we haven't gotten to your other questions. We'll go back to that in just a sec. Sorry, maybe I should go to, but I don't want to miss this question. Frank Christian, is Revelation 22:19 book of life or tree of life? And that I have no idea. Do you know the answer to that one?
No, I wouldn't want to venture into Revelation without doing some reading.
Okay, so let's look at this next question. Oh, no worries. So would the Hammurabi Law Codex be better described as a wisdom rather than a binding book?
So a little bit of background on where I think that question's probably coming from, and it's a good question. People have, so starting kind of with the traditional view, the traditional view was that, the laws in Exodus and in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, these were legislative, right? They were, they're being put down, and it's like there's a judge that's sitting. We kind of have modern eyes on this, right? There's a judge that's sitting there, and the judge says, "Okay, I've got a guy here, and he beat his slave, and the slave died immediately. What am I supposed to do?" And he opens up his scroll, and he goes, "There's that law. Okay, all right. Here's what I'm supposed to do." Right, like that's normative. Normative legislation, that it's something that this is not only does it reflect how the law was in Israel at the time, but that it was the binding law that the judges would, refer to. And in fact, I think that's where a question from last week came from. Are there instances in the Code of Hammurabi that people are citing the Code of Hammurabi in their legal decisions? And again, that's sort of the idea that this is some legislative or normative legislation in the text. So that was sort of the traditional view. There are some people that still hold to it, and some very, very intelligent people. Gregory Kirikinyo is one that I can think of off the top of my head. I think Zayah Falk also would argue for a form of that. But then there are other, more recently that view has come under scrutiny, and we don't have to go into like all the different variations of what people think of. But the one thing that was noticed about ancient Near Eastern law, and then of course by law in the Hebrew Bible, is that it follows this sort of casuistic, this case law that we see. So you have an if then, protasis and apodosis, and it was eerily similar to other genres in the ancient Near East, other genres of text in the ancient Near East. And in particular, you have omen series. So omens are constructed in the exact same way. So we think about this like if a black cat passes under your ladder, then you will have a bad day or something. That's how these omens are. So like if a city is set on a hill, then this will happen. Or if a newborn has, a spot on its left elbow, then this will happen. Right? These omens, if this happens, then that will happen. And it's eerily similar to that. And so what we know where those omen series, we know a lot about them. And one of the things that we know is that they were copied in scribal schools. So students would copy out long lists, these long lists. Anyway, the point is that it was determined that maybe these are legal treatises. Maybe these are describing how the law was, but it's not legislation that a judge turns back to. It would almost be like if right now we went to your church and we said, like a little boy went into Sunday school and said the F word, right? And he was set in the corner. There's no law that's been, promulgated that says, all right, if a young man says the F word, then he will be placed in the corner and time out. But it's a tradition, right? It's like an understood and unwritten rule. It's just the way it is. It's the cultural norm that's there. And everybody kind of knows that. Now, if you were to sit down and write out what are kind of the rules, like if somebody comes to Awana, all right, what are the rules here? All right, well, you can't cuss, and, you can't hit people. You can't, it's not that list that you're writing is somehow now authoritative law that you as a Sunday school teacher are going to turn to that sheet of paper and go, aha, it says it right here that you can't do it, and this is the punishment. It's that it's describing what's already in place. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I can see that it's kind of like when your laws, you can't spell out every single thing that somebody can do, but you spell out a general action, like saying if you mistreat others, but you can't spell out how did you mistreat others. You have all these different ways that people can mistreat others, and you would not be able to write them all down. There's just so many.
Yeah.
So
And
That's,
that's
yeah, I can,
definitely, sorry,
no,
go
I
ahead.
can see how that works.
So because of that, and this is one of the first things that people started noticing about these laws is how they don't seem to cover like there are a lot of significant things that they don't seem to deal with, and why is that? And so this was one of the ways that people kind of addressed that. Well, the question that Jesse asked was, are they more in line with wisdom? So there is an author that sort of laid this out. Fitzpatrick McKinley is her name, and she sort of set out the she and Joseph Blenkinsop set out sort of the main argument that said that these aren't actually describing legal practices that were in place. They're the natural outworking of what we would call wisdom, wisdom practice, wise practices that were in existence. So, one of the things that we know is that elders, originally elders, or elders in the city, or even fathers, they were the ones that were sort of responsible for uh, taking care of these sorts of sort of local smaller decisions. And so there was a wisdom that kind of built up. And so you see this in things like the Proverbs. And we have lots of Proverbs in Sumerian, lots of Proverbs in Akkadian. This is sort of a general thing that we have. And so the theory was that perhaps wisdom was the original, impetus for that these laws kind of grew out of. That's all very interesting. Like, it's an interesting discussion, and I can, if people email me, I can give the references that you guys can go take a look. But yeah, I think I probably come down on the position, not being a legal scholar, but I think probably what makes most sense to me, given what I know, is that I think these codes, these lists of laws in the ancient Near East and what we see in the biblical text, probably described what was going on, at least at some time, or in some places, what was actually in practice. Obviously, I don't think that was true for all of the things that are described, but for some of them, that makes good sense to me. It's not legislation in the sense that we would think, but it's describing, kind of like the Sunday school thing that I was talking about. It's kind of describing what's going on the ground.
Yeah, that
But
makes sense. Now I just thought of I think what'll be an interesting question. So, would you rather live under New Covenant, Mosaic Law, or that Code of Hammurabi? And I'm wondering if you just want to say if you could order those in order of preference.
Man, I mean, obviously, I think. Sorry, I want to say the New Covenant, just because I think that ethics have developed at that point, to a higher level. But that I have paused, because then I have to think, all right, wait a minute, which rule am I under? Am I under Roman rule now? I don't know if I want to be under that. But anyway, yeah. So, yeah, I would say probably Jesus' teachings, I think are the ones that I'd like to be under if I had the choice. Really, there's not a great deal of difference, and I know that Craig Reed asked about this, so we could talk about this. There's not a lot of difference overall between what we see in the ancient Near East. I'm not just thinking about it in the law codes, but in general, in thought. There's not a lot of difference between what we see in the ancient Near East and what we see in the Hebrew Bible. So I don't know that there'd be a whole lot of distinction there, but
Well, isn't there, you mentioned last week that there's in the Code of Hammurabi, you're judged according to which group you're in. I think you said there's 3 groups. And so there's a different judgment, less severe, obviously, if you're wealthier I think is what you said. And then I was wondering, what about the slave laws? Are they, like, for example, are you punished if people kidnap, or are you supposed to take slaves in if they escape, or are you supposed to capture them and bring them back, as how it was in antebellum slavery times?
Yeah, good questions. So let me see if I can remember them all. You might have to remind me.
Oh, no worries.
So let me start from the end, because now I remember what that one is, and I've forgotten your first one already. So as far as like slave capture laws, yeah, absolutely. In I don't know about all of them. I'd have to go back and look at each one, but certainly in like the laws from the third and the second millennia, um, the laws certainly that if you harbor a fugitive slave, that there's penalty for that, right? You do have to return the slave. So I would say, if your question is coming from the Deuteronomy 23, 15 and 16, or 16 and 17, which if you're looking at the Hebrew or the English, that I think there's something different going on there, that actually isn't, it's distinct in that you don't have anything put down like this in the other law codes, but I don't. So let me just say what I think Deuteronomy 23, 15 and 16 is doing. One of the things that is interesting about the book of Deuteronomy is it's structured after a vassal treaty, and it's been argued that it's structured after what's called the Esar-Haddon succession treaty. But it's a vassal treaty, so it's like, Yahweh is the one in charge, and is a suzerain, and then the vassal is Israel. And one of the things that's, I think, pretty clear, particularly if you get into like Deuteronomy 20, and even into 21, but particularly in 20, you see that there is supposed to be this great distinction between the Israelites and the other nations, and they're not to make covenants with them. They're not to make, treaties with them. They're not to, and I mean, you see that in play really throughout the biblical text. I think that that's significant for this particular passage, because what's stated in Deuteronomy 23, and we can go through it in detail if you want. It might be boring. I don't know. Is that you're probably, and this is what most scholars would say, you're looking at a foreign slave who is running away and escaping from a foreign nation, and he's coming into Israel. And there are other passages in the narrative sections of the biblical text that sort of give example of this. But the idea here, I think, is that an Israelite, Israel is supposed to not have like an extradition treaty with the surrounding nations. They're not supposed to give that slave back. And the rationale behind that, besides caring for the foreigner, is and caring for the outsider and for the oppressed and all those things, which is definitely there, is that this would require some form of extradition treaty, which they're not supposed to have with the surrounding nations. So if you look at the text says, let him come and pick whatever land that he wants to go to and dwell there. It's interesting that they would say that, because for an Israelite, in other words, if it were an Israelite escaping from an Israelite master, that stipulation seems strange, because it wouldn't be a mystery where he's supposed to go back, right? He's got a portion of land allotted to him. So I do think that this is, caring for the foreigner, caring for the, the outsider, but it's a foreign slave that's escaping into Israel. But no, that's unique. That's definitely unique in the biblical text. You don't see that specific law in that I know of in the Near Eastern law codes. So.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I got Jim Majors in the audience, and he made a video about me that says I lied. And actually, I just want to quickly say something about that, because I encourage you guys to go look at Jim Majors' video, and please freeze frame it if you go through there and look at the direct messages that he actually flashed really quickly. If you look at the direct messages, you're going to see that I did forgive Jim. That was the first thing I did in the first direct message. And then Jim proceeded to basically say that I better take his stuff very seriously. You'll also see that in there. He was going to accuse me of plagiarizing on 2 Christian books that I wrote on the side that have nothing to do with my workplace. But then he put in there you'll also see a flash of University of Tampa plagiarism policy, and then Jim saying that basically he could take that and do what he wanted with it. I actually ran my papers through Turnitin, and they turned out totally clean. So I don't know why he persists, but anyway, that's the truth. So that's just, sorry about that. I just want to mention that.
No.
So please go look at Jim's video and be sure to just stop the flames, because you will see in the direct messages that I did not lie, as he's claiming. Jamie Russell for $5, he says, did any people know the moral law before Sinai? Exodus 16 with manna, or Cain and Abel seem to know rules for sacrificing, and Noah knows of clean animals.
Yeah, I mean, so I think assumed in the question is the like historical accuracy of the account as it's laid out in the narrative. So that seems to be behind it. So it's like, okay, we have, the laws coming down from God at Sinai, and of course Paul deals with this issue. Was there sin before there was law? Because before the law, death reigned. So I mean, I think he's wrestling with this issue. Of course, from my perspective, the question, I wouldn't start with that background. But yeah, starting with that background, I mean, I think absolutely, according to the narrative, the way the narrative describes it, and of course the way that the New Testament authors interpret it, there's, I mean, I guess what we would consider to be a form of natural theology, God's natural revelation, puts it inside man's hearts to know what is good and what is evil. Again, I wouldn't go that direction personally, but I mean, I think from a theological standpoint that argument can very easily be made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. It is kind of interesting to wonder how people did live years and thousands of years ago. And that's another one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on my channel, because you've got an insight onto how life was on the ancient Near East. And actually it had to be really rough. Wouldn't you say it was pretty? I mean, I'm just glad we're living in modern times. I don't think I could survive back then.
No, I definitely could. That's why I was kind of actually my first response to the question of, what covenant or old covenant or ancient Near East, I wanted to say none. Can I just stay here? But if I had to pick one, yeah, because it's a different world.
Yeah. I'm just glad to be born at the time we are. And even in the last few years, I like living right now with the internet. I mean, imagine going through these plagues where we're not able to communicate with each other at all because you're sitting in your house and you don't even have a telephone. So.
Do you remember Juno? I don't know if you used Juno, but I remember it was like back in that had to be either in the very late 80s or the early 90s, but it was like an email account. Well, I probably just didn't know what I was doing, but I remember I would click like get mail, and that bar would go across. You'd hear bong bong, and then it would go across for like 5 minutes, and you'd sit there like, "Am I going to get an email? Am I going to get an email?" And then it would come up, and of course, for me, it would say no emails. But
I didn't have Juno. My first one was Prodigy, and then I had AOL.
Yep.
Yeah, and then
we're dating ourselves. We should say things like, the first thing that we had was a Super Nintendo or something. Actually, that's pretty old.
I could go back even farther than that. I had Atari.
We had a Tandy. At one point.
Oh, I don't know what Tandy is.
I think it was a early computer.
Okay.
Now I'd say that I'm not sure that's I don't know. I'm sure somebody in the side chat will tell us.
It's a long time ago. And that's what's funny is when I was little, I remember going and playing Pac-Man and Galaga. And so when I see those in like there's a pizza place around me that has those games. It just brings back memories. And I look at the stuff that my kids play and it's so sophisticated. And I'm like, let's bring back Pac-Man, man. That's just so much easier.
I watched Back to the Back to the Future series recently. And like, I don't know if you remember those, but 1985.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's like, what was it? 2015 that they went to, and it was like,
oh yeah,
man, yeah. So I feel old.
That's hilarious. And Steven Steen, he did a super chat, says my dad paid for Juno $10 email for like 10 years. We go back in my family to having my dad's first phone was the brick. the Microsoft, I know not Microsoft, I mean, Motorola brick. You remember
Wow.
that cell phone?
No.
Yeah,
What did
that's
it look
really
like?
going back. Oh, it was this gigantic box. And,
Oh,
and
was it like, go ahead, sorry.
it was about the size of a brick.
What's the one that was like big and gray? It had to be like,
Yeah,
it
that's
had to be
it.
like that and had the big antenna on it. Is that what it was?
Yes.
Yes.
That's the brick. And yeah, so, and I remember I thought I was super cool. Like, let me just give you an example of how super cool I was in that with that brick. I remember pulling up to my friend's house and calling, it was a guy friend. I call him on the phone and I'm like, I'm in your driveway. I'm like, dang, I'm so cool.
Look at me now. Oh man.
So
I see, I never had a cell phone. I always had the beepers.
oh yeah, we sold beepers. My family, we used to sell beepers
Is
and
that
cell
right?
phones. Yeah.
We were never smart enough to do the messages by pushing the numbers individually. What we had to do was we had to use two numbers per letter. So if we wanted to write E, we would hit 3 and then 2. So it was the third, the number 3 and then the second letter, because we couldn't figure it out if you just hit 3 and then typed in. I don't know what I'm talking about now. Sorry.
Oh, that's funny. No, that's good. Okay, I better get back to Jesse because I know we talked about Jesse's. He says the John Hopkins Digital Hammurabi project seeks to apply the newest digital technology to the world's oldest writing system. How far have they come, and what is the projected outcome of the project? And are you also part of the project?
Yeah, funny story. So I don't know if everybody knows, but when my first appearance was on the Non Sequitur show on YouTube, and during that, Megan was in the side chat, and I remember Steve asked me toward the end. So I understand you're going to start a channel, talking about the ancient Near East, and I was just like deer in the headlights. What are you talking about? But he had apparently been talking to Megan in the side chat, and so when we started, we were trying to think of what name to call the channel. And she taught a class. She got a Dean's Teaching Fellowship, and she taught a class, I guess it was earlier that year. And it was called Hammurabi in the Digital Age. That was the name of the class. And she was talking about, she does digital humanities stuff. So I said, well, why don't we just call it Digital Hammurabi? That'd be really cool. She said, yeah, it's awesome. So we got our YouTube channel, got the website, got it all set up. And somebody emailed us maybe like 2 weeks later and said, hey, I found this really cool project at Johns Hopkins called Digital Hammurabi. Is that you guys? And I mean, my heart sank because I had that project, come to find out, that project had been defunct for 15 years or something at that point. But the thing is, it had like several $1 million funding when it was in motion, and it's at Hopkins, so nobody was gonna believe that I didn't know about it and steal the name. Nobody would believe that. So anyway, the guy that was one of the professors that was in charge is a professor emeritus named Jerry Cooper. And he's like a god in the field. And I saw him at a conference right after that, maybe like a month or two after that. And I very tentatively went up to him, and he was eating it was at one of the breaks in between the sessions. He was eating like a rocket pop or something.
Rocket pop? Are you serious?
It was so funny. Yeah. He's such a nice guy, but I didn't really know him. So I went up to him and I said, Dr. Cooper. And he, yeah. And I said, sorry, can I talk to you for a minute? Anyway, he was super nice. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. Like, that project's been dead for over a decade now. But he said, oh, that project of yours sounds really great. Anyways, it was all fine. So I guess the short answer, after I've given this long, not so funny answer, is nothing to do with us at all. we didn't actually even know about it, and it was really frightening when we found out about it.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, because it does make it sound like, especially because you went there. Isn't that where you went? You went to Johns
That's where
Hopkins.
we went.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Like,
yeah,
who's
it's
going to
not like it's
believe
some
that?
other university. It happens to be
You
the
know what it's
same.
like? It was just like was there an asteroid? I think it was an asteroid that went by what, like 5 years ago, maybe? It might not even have been that long. I'm probably getting all this wrong, but there was an asteroid that passed pretty close to Earth, relatively speaking. Do you remember what I'm talking about? I mean, but at the
I,
same time,
yeah.
a meteor hit Russia. I don't know if it was the same day, but it was like really close.
Hmm.
And I was looking on, like CNN or BBC or something, and it was an article that said this meteor is completely unrelated to this asteroid. And I was like, nobody would believe that, but they showed it. They showed how it had been, I don't know, whatever. I'm out of my field really far now. But the fact that, like, who would believe that some huge boulder, comes by the earth and this
Yeah.
little rock that hits at the same time is not related to it at all, but apparently it wasn't.
Hmm.
So that's what it felt like.
Yeah, no, it's a kind of weird coincidence. And it's like,
Yes.
especially when I mean, it is kind of a unique name too. Digital
Yeah.
Hammurabi is definitely unique. So
Yeah. It was scary. It was
that is
really
funny.
scary.
So let me see what his last question from Jesse Camping, and then you guys will go to questions from the audience after that. If you have questions, tag me. The city of Babylon was given hegemony over Mesopotamia by its ruler Hammurabi after many years of turbulent times.
Mm-hmm.
So what actions did he take to transform this region, and how important is the erection of the Hammurabi stele to this process?
Yeah. So this time frame, to kind of give everybody a little bit of background to it, this is 18th century BCE, and we're talking about Iraq and like Eastern Syria, but the Tigris and the Euphrates River. So at that point in time, there were some pretty major kingdoms in play in that area. So in the north, you had a guy named Shamshi Adad. He was over the kingdom of Upper Mesopotamia. So north of where the like Baghdad is, where the Tigris and the Euphrates come real close. So up north of that, he's up there. You've got the city of Mari on the Euphrates. You've got Larsa. Anyway, bunch of different kings over these cities, and they're all kind of, some are fighting with each other, some are forming alliances with one another against the other powers. You've got Elam, which is Iran over in the east, coming and sticking its nose into Mesopotamia more than it normally did. Anyway, he's absolutely right. It's a very turbulent time. And we have the documents, like we have all this correspondence, these clay tablets from the city of Mari. And there's a really great book, several actually, but English translations of all these letters. Back and forth between the kings, back and forth between the generals, the commanders. We have all these letters, like Zimri Lim, one of the kings,
Hmm.
saying, "Hey, I need tell Hammurabi I need my troops back because I loaned him these troops so that he could fight against this other place, and he's not giving them back." And Hammurabi writes back saying, a little bit longer, and I'll give them back." Um, Anyway, what ends up happening is Hammurabi, who's over Babylon, aligns himself with different people and attacks other kingdoms and defeats them. And he does it kind of in quick succession. He defeats Eshnuna. He defeats anyway, doesn't matter. And eventually becomes, he gets, as Jesse said, he gets hegemony over this whole area. And he rules for, I don't know, 40 years, I think. It's a pretty decent rule, down to around 1750. So it was very significant because he unified a lot of the region there, and it hadn't been unified in a while. And so that being said, is there significance to the erection of this Code of Hammurabi stele? I mean, yeah, there was significance to it. I think we said this last week. It certainly wasn't the first set of laws like this. but yeah, I mean, it was definitely significant what he's doing in the Code of Hammurabi, and we can actually look at the prologue if you'd like. I can read some of it, but and actually, I think to answer Craig Reed's question, I was going to read a little bit of it. But Hammurabi is putting this monument up for the gods, I think, as primary consumers, and saying, I'm being the good, righteous king that I'm supposed to be. I'm the good shepherd, and I'm, ruling in the way that I'm supposed to. So yeah, I mean, it was a tough time, but it was significant, but it wasn't a new genre that he was creating.
When exactly was Hammurabi in office?
Yeah, I think he came into power like 1793, and
Okay.
I think he went until about 1750. I don't remember the dates
So
precisely.
really old then, like, so that's before a lot of the stuff from the Old Testament.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. Huh. I didn't know that. Yeah, that's interesting. So, and then I had another question here in the audience. Oh yeah, you were going to go into Craig Reed stuff too, but somebody asked
Sure,
a
sure.
question just a second ago. And thank you so much, Jesse Camping. He says, thanks, Dr. Josh and SJ. So thank you.
Oh, my
Praise That I
pleasure.
Am says, does Josh think, and I can't pronounce these, and I'm going to mess up just like I did with hegemony because I always forget how to
That's
pronounce
okay.
that word
That's
because I
fine.
rarely hear that. I know what it
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
means, but I rarely hear it.
Nobody reads it.
Well, I never, yeah, it's like I
Yeah, hear
read
it
it, but
pronounced.
I don't hear it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to mess up some other words here. Does Josh think Geyers, Geyrs, Sakirs, SakiYrs, and Toshabs were foreigners in the Mosaic socioeconomic system? If so, why?
Oh, guys. Yeah. Okay. I don't remember the second word that you say. There are different types of foreigners. There's the Ger, there's the Toshav, there's the Nochri, there's the, oh boy. Uh, I can't remember the other one. Anyway, there are different types of foreigners. There's a book that came out in 2011. And I think I don't remember if I mentioned it last time, but I'll mention it again. It's Foreigners, the law and the foreigner and the law, something like that, in the ancient Near East in the Hebrew Bible. But it's an edited volume. It's got a bunch of different articles that different scholars put in there, talking about different aspects of the law. It's actually a pretty complicated issue. So the Ger is there's debate about it, how it's used in the different legal texts. But I think pretty much everybody would say the Ger is the resident alien. So a Ger is somebody that, you see this in the passages that talk about have one law for the foreigner and the citizen. Um, uh, but the Ger is like somebody that's living in the land long term. They're given certain options. They can be, brought in. That they kind of become. I can't think of the word. Starts with an A.
They get apprentice or
Assimilated.
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 Okay.
Yeah, that's what into the culture, into Israel. There's still distinctions that are made. They still have a slightly different legal status, but they're brought in. So they have the option of worshiping in the cult. They can do a lot of things. The Nochri is someone who is a foreigner that's not staying long term, and they're not held to the same, like legal standards religiously. So, like, I think the Nochri can partake of a dead carcass, um, but it's assumed that they're not staying long term, so they don't get to worship in the cult. There are different aspects to it. The Toshav is the word, the Hebrew word in there comes. The root is yashav, means to sit or to dwell. So a Toshav is somebody. Again, it's debated, but it's probably like a tenant farmer. So if you're a foreigner and you migrate to Israel or you come into Israel, and of course you don't have any land of your own because it's all been parceled out to the Israelites. Um, I, as an Israelite, can rent. You can rent land from me, and you can till it, and then you pay me a certain, set standard, whatever it is, and then you get to keep all the rest. So the Toshav, he's not, he's a slightly different status. He can become very wealthy. You see this in Leviticus 25, like in verses 47 and following. The Toshav becomes very wealthy to the point that he can purchase a Hebrew slave, right? So he's doing well. Not all, obviously, not all of them did that, and probably very few did that, but became that wealthy. But they're foreigners. They're people from outside of the land of Israel that are coming in, and their legal status is slightly different in different circumstances. But there's more assimilation with some than with others. I don't know if that answered his question, but
yeah, no, it's interesting. And it definitely is definitely an interesting time to try to think about. I was thinking about, I wonder when they came up with a monetary system, for example, and they started using silver as far as trade. I mean, there's so many different things about our society, obviously, besides automation and all these amazing things we have in the last few years, essentially, or the last 100 years, but all of the other things that were so different about those societies. It's really amazing. We can gather a lot of this information that's been preserved. And like you mentioned, the Code of Hammurabi has been preserved because it was on these tablets that you said last time, clay tablets. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so that copies of them were on clay tablets, but I mean, the thing itself is a big diorite stele. It's 7 feet tall. I mean, it's like, we still have it. It's in Paris. It's really interesting because one of Megan's favorite periods of time in ancient Near Eastern history is the very early second millennium in northern Mesopotamia. And it's a time called the Old Assyrian period. And it's probably best known because, there were these caravanners, these merchants. And I get excited talking about it because it's really cool. Over in, along the Tigris and in the area of northern Mesopotamia, it was very easy and very inexpensive to buy tin and to buy textiles. Very cheap. And what they would do is they would load down these donkey caravans with tin and with textiles, and they would travel all the way up to Turkey, Anatolia. And there was a port. They called it a port there, a karam, and they would bring. It was all very sophisticated. There was like a trading colony up there. We have all these documents, contracts, letters, all kinds of stuff preserved from this place in Turkey. And they would bring the tin and the textiles, and they would sell them there locally for like triple the amount, because it was very difficult and very expensive to get tin and textiles. And they'd sell it all for silver, and then they'd take the silver back and buy a whole hell of a lot more, tin and textiles. And it was this beautiful, I mean, we have the ledgers, like we have the ledgers of the merchants, and here's what they sold. And it's so cool what you can reconstruct. And we have letters so people would go from Mesopotamia, and these traders would go, and they live half the year or maybe more, several years in Anatolia. But they'd be married to somebody that was living back here in Mesopotamia, and you'd get letters from the wives saying, you haven't sent enough money. When are you coming back? I mean, like it's really cool what we get.
That is, it's neat that we can even find that stuff. I still think it's fascinating that when history sort of began as far as being recorded for us, we can go back 50,000 years and maybe look at caves and see that they were doing paintings in caves and things like that. But it's interesting that it's only in the past really 10,000 years that we've got some sort of recorded history in different ways. And I don't know,
5,000,
maybe even 5,000.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of crazy when you consider how long humans have been here, that it's only been this little short period of time where we've got all this information.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that would speak to the people who are YEC, would probably like to think about that a different
that's a
way.
good point. Yeah.
But yeah, no, so that's so I'm seeing here, do we have any other questions in the audience? When you reach the building, are you in the clouds? I don't know what that's supposed to mean. So So Josh, do you have any thoughts or questions or anything else that you wanted to add?
Did you want me to speak to
Oh,
Craig's
yeah.
question?
Yes, that's right. I do want that. Craig will kill me. Oh, actually, before you do that,
Yeah, sure.
Craig made a video, you guys. You're going to want to go to Craig's video review of my chat with Dr. Josh. Yeah, it is very funny.
What did he call it? Like a grudge match or something?
Yeah, it's like meeting the minds,
Yeah. I thought I saw it and I went, wait a minute. Like, what did he watch?
That's what I thought too.
Gosh.
That was definitely funny. I didn't even know. He didn't even tell me he did that. I just was popping around YouTube and I spotted it.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun. But he asked a really good question. And it was, and correct me if I'm asking it wrong, but it was essentially in the Hebrew Bible, in the legal sections of the Hebrew Bible, we see a lot of moral stipulations, like ethical development. So care, if I'm remembering what he was saying, examples he was giving, like caring for the poor or caring for the orphan, or caring for your enemy, or things along those lines. And do we see things like that in the other law codes? So yes and no. That's very helpful. So no. So one of the things that's really interesting about the biblical text, the Hebrew Bible, is that it's really the only place I think that I know of where you get laws, like civil laws, in the same place that you get cultic or ritual laws, laws about worship and those sorts of things. You don't really see that in the other legal codes. They're all they don't have anything to do with here's the right way to worship, or here's this purity law or whatever. You don't get that stuff. So in that sense, as far as worship is concerned, because you don't have laws that deal with those sorts of things, that doesn't mean that they're not dealt with in other genres of text, because they most certainly are, but you don't get them in the legal section. But one of the things that I wanted to do was maybe I mentioned this, but in these ancient Near Eastern law codes, they don't just start off listing the laws. There's always a prologue, almost always a prologue. Sometimes it's not preserved, like it's broken off. But so I wanted to read, so here's the laws of Ornamu, and these come from, late third millennium. He says, part of it says here, I established justice in the land. I established freedom for the Akkadians and the foreigners in the land of Sumer and Akkad, for those conducting foreign maritime trade. He says, I secured safe roads for the couriers. I built the roadside houses. I planted the orchard. I did not deliver the orphan to the rich. I did not deliver the widow to the mighty. I did not deliver the man with but 1 shekel to the man with 60 shekels. I did not deliver the man with but 1 sheep to the man with an ox. And then at the end, he says, I eliminated enmity, violence, and cries for justice. I established justice in the land. And those sorts of things are very common. They're very, typical of these, the beginnings of these law codes. You see it pretty regularly because, again, from a propaganda standpoint, that's what the king's trying to do. He's trying to say, before the God, I'm doing it right. I'm taking care of the people, and I'm doing justice in the land. So that being said, there is, I was thinking about, is there an actual law that talks about something like the care of foreigners? And in the laws of Eshnuna, which comes from, just before the time of Hammurabi, maybe like 70 or 80 years, law number 41 says, if a foreigner, a Naptaru, which is another type of foreigner, or a Mudu, which is another type of foreigner, wishes to sell his beer, the woman innkeeper shall sell the beer for him at the current rate. I know that sounds really wow. But it actually is a good example of this because you have three different types of foreigners that are being spoken of here.
And they could have been ripped off. Maybe that's why they're
Exactly.
specifying that.
Exactly. That's exactly the point of the law. So like that, the barmaid, she could be like, "Oh yeah, we sell this stuff for real cheap. So, like that whole barrel, yeah, I could sell it for like $20. Here you go. Here's 20." And then she goes and sells it for 500.
Ex-
Um,
It's,
so,
it's, I
sorry,
just
go
want
ahead.
to say really quickly before I forget,
Yeah,
what's
yeah, definitely.
really interesting then is when you say there's this appeal to justice. So we can see even in ancient times as people knew that they should appeal to the care and
Yeah.
justice and those sort of good qualities that we still value today and still
Yeah.
probably will always value.
And I think, from there's a book by Yulin Tsai, I think is her name. I'll have to look. But she writes, and there's several people that have written on this, but she writes on biblical ethics. And I think particularly in the book of Deuteronomy. And one of the things that I will say for the biblical text is that because it is dealing to such a high degree with, in the legal sections with the civil or the criminal and the ritual, the cultic laws, there is passages like Deuteronomy 15, Leviticus 25, there is a very clear call to the Israelites to say, care for one another at what would seem to be your own expense. And do that, like loan money, even though in the next year you're going to have to forgive the loan. Give to your debt slave after the 6th year. Give him a whole bunch of stuff so that when he goes, he's not starting fresh. And do that knowing that economically you can't. How are you going to do that? Because God says, Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 26, I will bless you in everything that you do if you obey my statutes. So like that is novel, to be that explicit about that sort of divine care. But I did want to read one more thing that sort of, I think, plays into this. And there isn't, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, this book, Before the Muses, if anybody's interested in reading Akkadian literature, this is like the place to do it. Benjamin Foster collects a whole bunch of it in English translation. And we read a bunch of it actually on our channel.
So while he's bringing that up, you guys you'll want to go to his channel. It's called Digital Hammurabi. Just the same name as you see here in the chat. And he's actually written a couple of books himself. And so you guys can look at that. One of them's on slavery and one's on Sumerian language, was it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, in Sumerian language. So he's got some stuff there. So here you go.
Thank you, SJ. I appreciate that.
Oh, no problem.
So in this section, he's talking about literature from the 2nd millennium. So I think this actually, it might come from the period around Hammurabi, but he collects some proverbs, some like proverbial sayings. And this kind of goes into what you were saying, like this idea that there's sort of this basic understanding of how to interact with people. So the text says here, do no evil to the man who disputes with you. Requite with good the one who does evil to you. Be fair to your enemy. Let your mood be cheerful to your opponent. Be it your ill wisher, treat him generously. Make up your mind to no evil. Such is not acceptable to the gods. Evil is abhorrent to Marduk. And then there's a small break, and it says, the lowly, take pity on him. Do not despise the miserable and, it's broken. Do not wrinkle up your nose haughtily at them. One's God will be angry with him for that. It is displeasing to Shamash, who's the sun god. He will requite him with evil. He's also the god of justice. And then a little bit more. Give food to eat, beer to drink, present what is asked for, provide for, and honor. One's God will be happy with him for that. It is pleasing to Shamash. He will requite him with favor. Do good deeds and be helpful all the days of your life. So like this, like you were saying, this general idea that like there's a way that we're supposed to behave, like generally, I think is, like you were saying, clear, whatever period of time. I mean, maybe not whatever period, but probably. I couldn't confirm that, I guess. But like certainly here, second millennium, these ideas of justice and equality and caring for the weak and stuff, while they're not explicitly laid out in the legal sections like you see in the Hebrew Bible, they're present. And again, I think, you know, as you say, it kind of like people have the same kinds of ideas about what's good.
Yeah,
What's
I
not.
think
So,
I think that's great. It's interesting to see that in the ancients, because a lot of times people say, you know, when I get in these debates about objective morality and I talk about objective moral values and duties, and I try to say, well, can you make a case that the value of justice has always been something that's objective, basically, and people sort of judge themselves against whether or not people are just. And so I think that it's interesting just to find that in the past, because I haven't. And I'd be also interested to know, would we also find it in ancient India and ancient China and those kind of places too? It'd be interesting to see, because I have no idea if we would.
yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's great. So anyway, I really do appreciate you coming on today, and I want
Of
you guys make
course.
sure you subscribe to Dr. Josh's channel, and Megan, his wife, and also he goes on to Skylar Fiction. Skylar was in here a little while ago. I don't know if he's still here, but he
Oh,
was in here
cool.
just a little while ago. And
I
so
think he's got a debate. I think he's got a debate tonight with RC Apologist. I think they're
oh,
talking.
really? I'm gonna have to watch that. Oh, good.
I think it's
Okay.
Problem of Evil. I'm not sure.
Excellent. Problem of
Yeah,
evil with, oh boy, I think I know what Skylar's argument's going to be, but maybe he'll
probably.
surprise us. Skylar's kind of he's got a little set argument that he likes to use.
I'll
So
be interested
anyway,
to see how it shakes out. Yeah.
yeah. I know. Are
Very
you
cool.
working on any other books or anything you want to plug?
I am. Yeah, I'm just about done. I'm publishing my dissertation, but I'm publishing
Hmm.
it in like a popular format. So it's about scribal education in this period of Hammurabi, like this early second millennium. So how did kids go to school? How did scribes learn to write? What kind of
Hmm.
stuff did they copy out? And then um, I'm also in the dissertation, I tie that together with how people prayed, how communities prayed in particular to keep the gods from getting really angry with them and destroying their city. So
Hmm.
that I should be done the draft of it hopefully this month, and then do the copy editing and get it out hopefully in the next couple of months. So,
Nice. Very nice. No,
and
that sounds great.
actually, sorry, um, we just got asked, Megan more than me, but we were asked by a publisher out in London. There's a series called Lost Civilizations, and they've got several books about like the rise and life and fall of a whole bunch of old civilizations. And they asked us to write the book on Assyria. So that's pretty cool. They said we'd like to have a draft in 18 months.
Hmm.
So I don't
Nice.
think it'll take that long, but yeah, I'm excited. It's pretty cool.
That's really
So
exciting. And it's always nice when you can use your academic knowledge and put it to good use,
yeah, it
to
really
write
is.
books and get the word out. And because not many people, I think your field is, I would imagine there's not that many people in your field, when you compare it maybe to say some
Yeah,
field like biology or something.
definitely. Yeah, far
So
fewer.
yeah, so good. So all right. Well, I want to say thank you again for coming on. And you guys again,
Thank
please
you.
subscribe and please like and subscribe to my channel too, if you would. It'd be great. I definitely have about half the people who watch my stuff subscribe. I've actually seen the
Oh,
stats.
is that right?
There's a lot of people who don't subscribe. Um, so that's okay. That's fine. So okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. So here we go.